Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And again, like it's just awesome to get to meet you, closer to in person after being buddies on Twitter for this long.
Yeah, no, it's the same here. I'm excited. This is gonna be fun. So
Yeah. So I guess, the idea that I had in mind with this podcast is I just feel very blessed that I have so many like Twitter friendships with people who are like really successful and doing amazing things. And yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to embarrass you, but it's a fact. Like you're really cool. You're doing something that a lot of people are super interested in. I just wanted to offer you a platform to like share a bit about your journey, if you don't mind talking about that.
sure. Yeah, no, you're too kind, and I will do my best to do this justice. So yeah, for folks who don't know me, I'm Michael Mullarkey. My background is I got a PhD in clinical psychology. I Before that, I went to college in DC and I actually worked there as a vocational rehab counselor while getting my master's at night. Actually, really thought I was going to go more clinical direction, but really fell in love with the research. Continued to like doing clinical work, seeing patients as a therapist, and did that as all clinical psych PhDs do throughout my degree as well.
Hmm.
So, got my PhD at UT Austin, and then came up and did my clinical internship year, which is like residency, but for clinical psychology PhD students at Stony Brook University in New York, and
Got
stayed on
it.
at Stony Brook for postdoc with
Yeah.
Dr. Jessica Schleider, who is great, and ended up doing a lot of my work at UT Austin with Dr. Christopher Beavers, who is great. Also, my cat Boo says hello. She is trying to climb my chair,
I
so we
see
might get
her,
to meet her as well.
a blur in the background. Yeah.
So yeah, that's my general background. And I can understand if folks are like, how and why would you end up in data science from there? So
Yeah. Well, and I know that, you aren't the only one that is interested in this path, and a lot of folks will, again, not to put any pressure on you, but will see you as a positive role model for how to navigate that transition. And just to speak for a moment to our personal connection, I think like
yeah.
I came across you because you put out on Twitter like this awesome like blog post about how to visualize listening habits on Spotify. And your visualizations were so beautiful, dude. Like it was so cool. You inspired me. I followed up, and it's still like one of the favorite like little side projects that I did. And yeah, how much kind of like outreach stuff like that were you doing like in your postdoc or before you made your transition?
Yeah, so I think it's like I think that's a really good way to frame it actually, of like, okay, how did I come to, because this was a process. I feel like there are absolutely people, and I don't want to invalidate or take away from them, that more or less kind of one day wake up and go, I'm done. I'm done with academia. I don't
Yeah,
want this anymore.
yeah.
And for me, it was a little bit more of a process, and you can actually see that a little bit in some of the public work I was doing. So one of the blog posts I actually put out was saying, hey, I'm opting out of the PI track. And that was, there's this temptation to tell this like really clean narrative of like, oh, like very tidy of, well, I just realized this wasn't for me. Then I started looking at industry positions. Then I figured it all out, did a great job, and now I'm a data scientist. And it's like, no, this was a bumpy, weird up and
Mm,
down path that I'm very grateful for. I'm very grateful for where I ended up. And I kind of did it in stages. I realized I didn't want to be a professor
mm,
because a lot of the people who I knew were professors. As much as they might like their jobs, I was looking at what they were doing, and I was like, well, I don't want that. I don't want what the job actually is. I
mm.
thought I wanted that job. But I wanted the idea of that job, not the
Yeah,
actual job, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
I
There's
think
this kind
so. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this kind of, and I think one of the things that really drew me to the idea of being a professor, I think people have all different kinds of reasons for that. And some of the things for me, among others, was being able to live kind of a flexible, non-work centered
Hmm.
life. There's kind of this idea of, oh, inside of academic spaces, there's this extra space that's given to,
Hmm.
oh, well, you're not working an office job, quote unquote. You're not
Hmm.
working 9 to 5,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
unfortunately, I think the reality of that is like, yeah, you're not working an office job, you're not working a 9 to 5, you can work whatever 80 hours you want.
Exactly right.
Um,
That's kind of a dilemma that I've definitely seen a lot in a bit of a different research field, but I think a
mhm,
lot of us, yeah, it's it's a fact that the culture is driven by the necessary dedication to this work, and of course, like I want to honor that the work is really important. You know,
mhm,
like, and I really appreciate that, like, you had a positive relationship with your mentors. I have so many professors whom I admire. It's also hard, and nobody
yeah.
has, we don't have to do that, right? Like, we have choices. So I just wanted to add some of my own feeling to color your
Yeah.
perspective there. Yeah.
No, I mean, and
Yeah.
I think it's, I think it's so hard to convey the level of appropriate, I feel, frustration with systems and structures, and recognizing that those structures and systems are made up of people. You don't get to just gesture at the structures and absolve all personal responsibility,
Hmm.
while also trying to remember to center the critiques on the structures and systems and the roles people play inside those, rather than having it be about, the people themselves. I will say I don't think I'm
Yeah.
great at that personally. I think that it's something that I have to be incredibly intentional about. But
Hmm.
because I do think there are quote unquote politeness norms, especially that they exist in broader society. I'm not going to pretend they're a specific to academia thing. And I think that inside of academia, because reputation is
Hmm.
essentially a currency, they don't pay you with money, they pay you with prestige and reputation in a lot of cases,
Hmm.
that there can be even more norms about like, oh, well, you said this is bad, therefore you are personally attacking me. And I think in some cases, like that's probably true. I'm not going to pretend that I have never gotten frustrated and said things in a way that probably wasn't the most effective.
Hmm.
And I do think there, like I have friends who still like not just are professors, but who like still really want to be professors and aren't yet. And I want
Yeah.
to, well, I that's not for me. And I
Hmm.
generally, frankly, don't think that's a great idea. That doesn't mean like I don't know their exact circumstances. Like I don't
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
else is going on with them. Like I have to trust on some level that as long as they are being intentional about not harming others and actively buffering people who they're working with or who are working under them from those things, that they're doing their best. And it's really
Absolutely.
hard for me. Like I don't think I do a great job. I try.
I think that what you just explained is a really nice way to navigate how difficult that whole conversation is. We see it all the time on Twitter. And,
Mm-hmm.
personally, like, I don't expect anyone to be like perfect. I guess the way that I view it is we want to be personally responsible in the conversations, and especially to the relationships we have with people who are in academia and who have moved on. I
Yep.
like the way that you framed it. I also have a lot of friendships with professors whom I really admire for the work they're doing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's obvious that they're changing people's lives for the better. There are also real structural challenges that they're facing, and like I would love to see the whole system just improve to make it kinder for them and for everyone else who's coming up through the
Yeah.
process. And like you, I have friends, like really dear friends who are grad students and postdocs and who are applying to academic jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to see them succeed. I want them to get everything
Yeah.
that they want, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, I
And
mean, and that's like,
yeah,
it is, there's a tension there, right?
yeah,
Like, and
exactly.
like, I think where I've gotten to at this point, it's gonna be fascinating. I'm sure I'll listen back to this at some point and be like, God, like I've changed my mind on this, that, or the other thing. I don't think this is anywhere close to set in stone. And like, I think where I've tried to navigate at this point is where I have reached personally. It is very different from where I was even 6 months ago, forget a year ago, forget 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know where other people are on their paths, and there it's not like a straight line for any of us. And
Hmm.
so trying to still call out real harm where it exists, and
Hmm.
not doing whataboutism of like, oh well, isn't it just like that in this other type of field as
Yeah.
well? Like really trying to reckon with that, and thinking
Yeah.
about that, and recognizing that just because I'm at a certain place in how I'm thinking about this, like if I've changed so much, I can't really be that certain that I'm really, really right about this. And so
Yeah,
trying to hold my opinion strongly but loosely, if that makes sense.
absolutely. I really admire that position. And I think, that's key to the personal responsibility in the conversation is recognizing that we can be flexible and being open to new perspectives and new information all the time and being able to incorporate that. I identify with what you said that like my personal perspective has changed so much, even in the last 6 months, right?
Yep.
6 months ago was basically when I was like, okay, I'm really gonna try the job search thing and consider leaving
Yeah.
my postdoc.
Yep.
3 months ago, like I left my postdoc and I think I felt that that was a difficult experience, right? And I had a lot of strong
Yeah.
feelings about it, and I've shared some of them on Twitter.
Mhm.
Um, so like the words are out there, and I also feel that like I was able to meet so many people and find so much kindness because people responded to that genuine emotion in a really like positive and supportive way. Um,
Yeah.
and I really want that to like guide the conversation moving forward, right? And I just want us all to come
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, and I do think I would love to see folks come together. And one thing I will say is I do think that there is maybe a perception that, oh, the way for people to come together is for people to complain about bad working conditions less.
Hmm.
And I want to say right now, I categorically reject that idea. I think
Yeah.
that like people are like, oh, like Twitter is just, and a lot of this is not Twitter. And we can talk about like actual data science soon, I guess. But like, I will say it's not just on Twitter. It's when you go to academic conferences, it's the hush hush talks between PIs and hallways. It's, the overwhelming culture is very, very pro academia. And I
Hmm.
think that people maybe see Twitter as this like, oh, like you're just being so negative. And I think that I'm not saying that it can't get out of hand sometimes. And I do think that it's important for people to get perspectives that would be, I think, really hard to get in
Hmm.
places that are still very, hey, like this is the one true path, this is the way. And maybe I'll gesture vaguely at like, I think people have gotten a little more savvy. I think there are some people who are still like, yeah, I know if you go to industry, you're a failure. But I think that some people have gotten a little more savvy and they're like, well, of course, all paths are great, but I'm only ever going to talk about or
Hmm.
train or do anything
Hmm.
about this one path. Like I know the right words to
Yeah,
say, but here's what my behaviors are. And controlling for privilege behaviors betray priorities. Like, and if you're behaving in a certain way over and over again, even if you know the right quote unquote words to say, I got some questions. Let's put
for
it that way.
sure. Yeah, I feel I very much agree with what you were saying. And I guess the way that I saw it what I have in mind when I want people to like come together is like, let's be honest and transparent with each other, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't mean hiding the negatives or only speaking to the positives of an experience. It's actually,
Yeah.
it's offering a comprehensive take on the experience,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
want to bring that to like, commenting on the academic experience as well as like when you move beyond, right? So
Yep.
I want to
Yep.
unveil, the mysteries, which
Yep.
to like for so many, I assume like for you, like for me, it was so mysterious what it would be like on the other side. I had no idea. I had no realistic conception.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's the thing too, is like I feel like everything I just said, if somebody like stopped listening right there, like I don't know, maybe I'll accidentally end up the main character of Twitter for a day. I hope not. But um is like it's not like I can't even speak to industry as a whole. Like I can speak to data science. Like it's not like data science is utopia. Like it's not like I
Right,
am like this one thing is the worst and this other thing is the best. It is more
right.
for me like doing things like this, like even if it does open me up to some stuff, way less than if I was a person of color or identified as a woman. I'm just gonna
Hmm.
say that
I know
straight out.
yeah,
Um, but
I
like
agree
even
with
if that
you.
opens me up to a little bit more criticism, like I think first of all, like hopefully I can like change and get better if it's good faith, and second of all, even if it's not so much, I think that I do want to try to talk people through, because I mean like my transition to data science was bumpy, and
Hmm.
I want to kind of as accurately as I can, as transparently as I can, talk about what that was like, try try to share like, okay, here's what it was like for me. How much does that generalize to anyone else? Unclear.
Hmm.
But trying to say things that are maybe just generalizable enough to other people that they might be useful without going too much to, oh, just do what I did.
Yeah,
So yeah, happy to talk more directly about that. I just feel
for
like,
sure.
unfortunately, if we don't do this kind of, I really look forward to, I think the actual coming together would be, we don't necessarily have to do this preamble before we talk
Hmm.
about the transition to data science. About, I'm not trying to say that everyone has to leave and go do data science jobs,
Yeah,
or I'm not saying
yeah,
that you're a terrible person inherently if you don't do what I did. It's more about like, okay, like here's a
yeah.
way to do this if you want.
Yes, I completely agree. And I know I completely understand that there might be some people that would like want to skip the whole preamble and just be like, just tell me the pathway. But I feel strongly with all the people that I connect with, there is the need to have this meta conversation. Um,
Yeah.
and I really thank you for being so transparent about this. I really appreciate where you're coming from.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think like you've also, like for what it's worth, like the way I've seen you engage with people has helped me try to figure out like, okay, how can I do this at least more effectively? And frankly, a lot of times that's not engaging.
Right?
And
Isn't that?
I'm not saying that's the best thing. Maybe that's a terrible idea. I genuinely don't know. But like for me, it's, you know, I work a reasonable number of hours a week now, and I don't really want to spend a bunch of. I'm happy to spend extra time trying to help people who want to know things, and I have exactly zero extra time for people who are not doing stuff in good faith.
Yeah.
So
No, I know what you
I'll say
mean.
about that.
It is interesting that it seems like, you can have a random character like throw out a hot take on Twitter and like that's gonna spark a controversy, but like the majority of people are like clearly kind of like in the middle ground where like yeah, they
Mhm.
have a set of experiences where they're probably inclined to like one perspective more than the other. But most
Mhm.
people are like pretty reasonable. It's like it just seems to be like hot takes, especially that like strike the
Yeah.
nerve and go viral. And then people
Yeah.
kind of they use that unfortunately to frame the discussion moving ahead, right? Like because so many of them come into it, the only thing that they've seen is like a viral tweet, and it reflects just one narrow slice, even of what that individual is saying, right? It's not a comprehensive view, but they're like, this is what this person is about. So yeah, in that way, like Twitter, uh, as much as we love it, like that's how you and I met. Like it has
Mhm.
serious issues, and I think that's one of the fundamental issues that hampers social cohesion on the platform.
Yeah, no, and like the bottom line for me, then we can like actually talk about data
Yeah,
science is
yeah.
the like we are not exempt from the dynamics that play out on social media sites just because we've had more privilege or had more education or some combination of those things. Like there are there are dynamics that I think pretty good, by the way, academic research showing that, stuff that generates more outrage is gonna fly faster than stuff that is more kind of, you know, less outragey. I think that's
Hmm.
the technical term.
Yeah.
And so like I think like part of one of the reasons why um, you know, I have tended to not feed the trolls, which I realize is a privilege that I have. Like I cannot do that, and then like people will forget, and it'll be fine. A lot of people don't have that privilege. Again, especially I want to call out specifically, like if you're a person of color or if you identify as a woman, like people will criticize however you interact. And by the way, again, it's not. I know Twitter is a lot of where people publicly see these things, but it's not just Twitter. It's like interactions at conferences, like interactions with the departments, interactions at seminars, like things like
Hmm.
that. Like these, what we see on Twitter are like sometimes, yes, people saying things that they wouldn't say in person, but a lot of these dynamics are things that also play out in other spaces.
It's an
It's just
extension.
less, yeah, it's less visible.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah,
so yeah,
I agree
but
with you there.
the reason I don't engage when I can is I do feel that there is a little bit of a disconnect. I think you put it pretty well of like what people are actually thinking versus like what is the most extreme thing that people happen to be thinking at the
Hmm.
time. Not even saying necessarily that extremity isn't always inherently bad. It's
Hmm.
just that um if that's your entry point to the conversation, it can feel like, wow, this is really wild, and like some parts of it are, but a lot
Hmm.
of it is probably less so than it seems at
Right.
least.
I
So
totally agree with you. And so like this is it, you put into words one of the feelings that like motivates me to have these conversations and then share them publicly is like, again, with Twitter, with many forms of online communication, you get a little snapshot, right? Like one angle into the many angles of what makes up a whole person, and even a dialogue between two people. So yeah, I know some people are not going to want to like do the long form listening or viewing, but this is what I want. I want to share a real
sure.
like human discussion about these ideas. So yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm excited. I'm excited that we're doing this, and I'm excited that we're gonna be diving in on some of my experiences, and hopefully seeing what we can get out of them. So
Yeah, that being said, shall we transition? I like that we had the meta conversation. Shall we talk
sure.
about like, yeah, do you just want to like walk through a bit more of what your process was and understanding this is your personal experience, but we can all learn from it.
Sure, yeah. So happy to. So the like I said, there was kind of this bumpy kind of ride. And so I decided some amount of time into my postdoc that I was like, I don't want to be a professor. I don't want to be a PI. And I was still really excited about the work that we were doing. We were doing a lot of work with digital mental health, trying to increase access to care for especially young people. And I've been really passionate about that. That's been one version or another of my life for nearly 10 years or a little bit longer at the time. And so, I wanted to stay. And then one thing was that I did do is we negotiated for me to stay on as a research scientist, not having the research scientist title instead of a postdoc, which one thing I will say is there is a dollar amount that exists, at least if your lab is lucky enough to be grant funded, for just, I don't want to be a PI anymore. You have to, even inside of the academic area, pay me like a staff member instead of someone who wants to be a professor. So
would you mind breaking that down a bit? And I
sure.
guess I'm curious, so like, are you still like connected as a research scientist, or was that before you
That was
transitioned?
before. That
Okay.
was before. So again, it was kind of this multi-stage thing where I was a postdoc, and then I realized I didn't want to be a professor. So, and that was not even a year into my
Hmm.
postdoc. And
Yeah,
so then what I negotiated with my PI was essentially when the funding flipped over into the next year, I would be I would be a research scientist instead of a postdoc. And
got you.
so just to be transparent, like that was about $15,000 more per year, which
Okay.
was a
Yeah.
very large percentage of what I was making
I mean, that's like
before
what a
then.
lot of postdocs have been asking for as like an increase to their salary. So yeah,
Yep.
well
Yep.
done doing that. I didn't really, yeah, I guess I didn't think about that as an option. It's good to know that it could be an option for other folks too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and one thing I will say, I mean, like I what one of the many privileges, my privilege stack goes halfway to the moon in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the
Yeah.
many was that I came from a very well-funded lab, right? So
Right.
like that's not even inside of the academic structures. Like I will say, like I want to credit Jessica a lot. I think that she
Mm-hmm.
really did look for, okay, like what are the paths to getting me closer. I mean, you can't get to market value inside of the academic sphere. Like, let's just
Right.
say
And
that
I don't
straight
think
up.
anyone
You
is
can't.
expecting that. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's just,
Yeah.
we don't expect public funding to reach
Yeah.
like the cutting edge of what's going on in the private sector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like she really did a great job. And I think for what it's worth, I think she does this generally, is trying to figure out like how do I get people paid. And
Yeah.
and so that was helpful. And for what it's worth, I mean, again, like I stayed. I mean, like
Hmm.
I like, and that was something where I stayed for, in the end, like almost not just as like I stayed on that contract for 10 months, essentially, the research
Okay.
scientist contract. And like I made the decision some amount of time before that. I don't remember the exact date. So it was
Yeah.
closer to, maybe, even not quite a year and a half, but essentially a year and a half in that role instead of as, I
Right.
still technically had the postdoc title and the postdoc pay for what it's
Yeah.
worth for a
Yeah.
while after we made this, like, hey, like I'm not going to be a PI. Let's figure out something that works to both of our benefits. So I did that. And then I did realize though that basically there were a lot of things. It was a slow process, but I was basically on a walk one day with my I guess, would she have been my girlfriend or my fiance at that time?
Well,
I,
congratulations.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, my wife now, and my now wife is how I'll put it. And I remember
Yeah.
when we got engaged and everything. I just don't remember exactly when this
It's
walk,
okay. I'm not trying to.
when this walk was. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
know. Like, like, hi, if you're listening, hi, I remember.
Your
And
partner whom you adore and who
yes,
contributes so much to your
exactly.
life. Yeah.
Thank you. That is
I
very true.
understand. Mhm.
And so we were on a walk, and it basically, we kind of talked about all the different things. Like I was trying to talk through things, and kind of together we were like, seems like I want to go. It seems like,
Mhm.
even, and I think the way to sum up all of those things was, even under, in a lot of ways, best case circumstances, as a staff scientist in a soft money position, like it was grant funded, like the grant funding only exists if the PI keeps getting grants. Like it's not what I wanted. Like even under
Hmm.
the absolute, some of the most privileged, best case scenarios in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
really, it wasn't what I wanted anymore. I changed, my priorities had changed, who I saw myself as had changed, and that was okay. And so that really started, you mentioned kind of the starting really in earnest after that walk was when I really, I talked with my PI too, where I was able to be transparent. And I also, not just my current PI, Jessica, but I also talked with the person who wasn't technically my dissertation chair, but ended up being one of my really strong mentorship figures back at UC Austin,
Hmm.
Chris Beavers. And he also, not only were both of them super supportive, but they were very actively behaviorally supportive. I met with Chris basically every week during my job search, and I was
That's
also meeting with
awesome.
Jessica, and some of it was some of it was very instrumental, helping connect me to people. Some of it was being a sounding board. Some of it was really being willing to just hear me go, wow, this was wild. And so, I know a lot of people don't have it. Like that is, I think, like the 99th percentile of PI support,
Hmm.
if not higher. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's something that, when you only see the kind of successes or whatever,
Hmm.
like that was huge, and obviously was getting a bunch of support at home. My wife is spectacular. So like I had a, not to mention like all the other friends and folks in my corner. So like there was like a whole village behind me while I was doing
Exactly.
this. And I was able to do it
Yeah.
openly. Like I didn't have to like, I know some people have to like pretend they're going to dentist appointments or whatever to like go to
Hmm.
interviews, even if they're working remote, because what if the PI asks for a meeting during something? Like I didn't have to
Yeah.
do that. I
Yeah.
could just I could just transparently like apply and like continue to do my work. Like it wasn't like,
Hmm.
but it was, I got to really focus on trying to build skills and apply. As applying for jobs is at least a part-time job and probably a full-time job in a lot of ways. And so I got to do that under pretty much ideal circumstances. And
Yeah.
I that is not generalizable. I don't think that's anywhere close to generalizable for basically anyone. So
Right. And it's really awesome that you had these active support mechanisms. We try to emphasize this sometimes in our discussions that
mhm,
passive support is good. I mean, it's better than like being antagonistic. It's much better than like,
of
you
course.
know, there are people like you mentioned that feel that they can't even be honest about this for very obvious reasons, that they'll face
Yep.
negative feedback. And that's
Hmm.
really scary when you haven't like locked down your first position where you feel like safe enough that you'd be okay, right?
Yeah,
So it's great to have the active support, and like you said, it always takes a village. It always does.
it really
all of
does.
that all of that being said, like I feel that I had a lot of support as well, and you're acknowledging all your support, and it was still hard. Like
It
it's
was it was really hard.
it's a
It was.
crazy world out there.
Um, no, and I think it's funny. I literally, just a little bit before this, I was meeting with somebody who also a clinical psych PhD who wants to go into data science, and they asked a lot of great questions. I'm not gonna shout out their name because I don't know if they feel comfortable. Otherwise, I would,
I just wonder if
because
I
I
know
want to
them
give them
maybe,
credit.
but
Yeah. And like they asked some great questions. And one of them was kind of this, essentially was getting at, they're gonna say it better than I'm about to. They said it better than I'm about to, but like, how hard was this?
yeah,
Like really, like realistically, how hard was this?
people want
And
to
I,
know.
yeah, and the answer is like, despite all of the advantages I just listed that I realize will not be true for most people, it's really freaking hard.
Yeah.
um, and I almost cursed, but I don't remember if we're doing that on this. So I'm just like, know that
Um,
that's the level that I feel. So
yes,
it's
I
very
appreciate
difficult.
that. Yeah, I think,
Um,
we're all adults here, and the emotion warrants using the language that feels fitting. I
yeah,
appreciate your caution nonetheless.
yeah, no,
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it's important to be transparent about that for me, because I think that, and again, this is not just about Twitter. It's also about, other places in your life when you're talking with your family. If you talk to your family, like if you're talking to your friends, like it can be tough to be like, oh, like how's the job search going? And like people who mean really well, even, and being like, well, I've been doing it for 4 months and I just am back to the beginning again. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
like I got to this point in the process and it didn't end up working out. And
Yeah.
so I think that I think that it's really easy to only see, like, and also when you're talking to people who are doing data science, inherently they are doing data science, right? Like
Hmm.
if you're doing informational interviews, or if you're seeing people post things,
Hmm.
again, I really feel like this isn't mostly about Twitter, but like it can be how a lot of people experience
Sure,
this.
sure.
So but like you're seeing people who like they've made it,
Hmm.
like quote unquote, like they're there already, and so it can feel, I know that like I am very fortunate that I am not super predisposed to being anxious or really down. And this process got to me on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
And it's some of the more anxious and down on myself that I felt. There was, just to kind of walk people through it, if that's okay.
Please,
Is that
please. Yes.
um so I was very fortunate in that I also, like, I mean, I was essentially like, as the research scientist, I was hired as a like data scientist. Like
Hmm.
that was what I was. And so um I think that did help, because people were seeing, I got more bites on my resume than I think I would have if I hadn't been hired in that way and
Because
hadn't.
you had the job title, basically. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 And so I think that really did help. Again, that's an opinion, not a fact. I don't know. But I have heard people talk about,
And it
if you don't,
matches my perception and also
yeah,
traction that I've noticed with recruiters, in particular on LinkedIn. So
yeah, yeah.
I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Like, it's not just what's happening on Twitter, it's what's happening on LinkedIn. And yeah,
Mhm.
that's a whole different podcast that I'm not gonna try to do right now. But if you want to have me back, we can talk about that. But
I'd
um
love to, yeah.
all
But
right, let's do it. But so yeah, so I was very fortunate in that I was getting a decent number of bites on my resume and doing screening calls, like, and so it was a very first world esque problem of, I between mid January, I would guess, somewhere between mid January and end of May, I was either, I looked back at my calendar because I didn't want to lie. I was
Mhm.
either scheduling or doing an interview every week, I think, but one
Every
during
week
that.
for
Yeah.
5 months. Yeah.
Yeah. Which
Um,
on one level, awesome, great. That means that like my resume is like getting the bites I'm looking for. And wow, that was wild. And I probably would have done it and will try to do it differently the next time I do it, unless I'm in a situation where I'm like, I need to get a job as fast as possible, which kind of was the case here. I mean, my contract was going to
yeah,
end at end of July. If I didn't have a job by then, you know,
it would be tough. Yeah.
it'd be tough.
Yeah, and I
So
feel
yeah,
like 6 months is a pretty reasonable time frame for the job search. Like that's kind of what it takes, and it's really important that we talk about, frankly,
yes.
the emotional cost of
Mm-hmm.
sustaining the search, right? It's not just
Yep.
about the skills,
Yep.
skills help, job titles help. It might be a
Yep.
requirement to get your foot into the door, but it takes a personal commitment and tons of support to sustain that journey. I I wonder, would you mind? One thing I've been trying to talk to people about is like the experience with talking to recruiters. So like,
Sure.
could you estimate like how many applications you did, which turned into like screening calls, and then like interviews. I've guessed like it takes around 100 applications and then like at least 10 screening calls, like basically to get like an interview
Yeah.
offer. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a unique experience. And again, this is something where I mean I still put in a lot of applications. Like I think we are directionally in the same place,
Yeah.
roughly. I think for me, one thing I want to emphasize is I really think it's 6 to 12 months. And if we're being honest with ourselves, again, like trying to be transparent, not talk about like, oh, this is utopia, it's perfect. Like where like one of the things I ran into multiple times and sometimes in pretty devastating fashion, and what I'll talk about is, hiring freezes or hiring slowdowns. And like those are happening now,
It's happening right
especially,
now. Yeah. So it's
yeah,
very timely.
especially in tech, but not
Mhm.
just in tech. I mean, that's the thing too. It's not like, oh, well, just go be a data scientist in this other field. Like, yes, there's a little bit less boom bust in non-tech data scientist positions.
Mhm.
And like it's not like those jobs are completely insulated from the outside economy. Like I do think
Yeah.
like it's no kind of job is a magic escape hatch outside of all of the other problems plaguing our society. Like
Truly.
there, like being paid more money is, of course, a huge, huge privilege and can buy you out of a lot of things. I'm not trying to
Mhm.
say that part. What I'm trying to say is like, it's not like we are not inside a wild economic system,
Mhm.
no matter whether we take, a data science job, a non-data science job, whatever. Um,
Always, right? We're always within a system of systems, if you will. Not to get
yeah,
too like
no,
meta or
it's true.
abstract, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
just yeah.
it's just how it is. So yeah, I mean, I think that for me, I don't know exactly how many jobs I applied to, partially because I competed in a live stream machine learning competition the
Somehow I
summer
missed this, by the
before.
way. I'm so interested. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very fun. It was, and so for me, like it's an example of like I'm not suggesting that everybody do this as a way to network, but like for me, I was able to find a way to basically start to network with a lot of people in the data science community that was fun. I mean, challenging, but fun for me.
Mhm.
I'm also a pretty competitive person, so it was a positive way to channel some of that energy. But yeah, so I had met a lot of folks through competing in that. It's called Sliced. I think there's going to be a season 2 at some point that I am absolutely excited for. I hope to compete, but I'll be happy even if I just get to watch, honestly.
You could come back
And
and
so
defend your title. Yeah,
to be
that'd be
clear, I
cool.
did not win. I did not win this thing. David Robinson,
Uh
or D Rob, was the person who ultimately won. I did make the playoffs though, which I was proud of. So
oh, that's a huge
um,
performance. That's very strong.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So but yeah, so like that, I first of all, like you talked about like leveling up skills, like that really helped me level up my skills pretty quick, because it's like, well, if you have lots of, well, on the relative at least, lots of people watching you code live,
God, that is like
it's
my
a
worst nightmare, dude.
that's fair. That's fair. I will say it did help prepare me for for having people watch me code live one on one, but it's not the same thing. Like,
Mhm.
I actually get more freaked out when it's like one or two people watching me. It's like if it's way more than that, it's like, well, like,
You can
I'm
separate
yeah,
yourself
I can
and
separate it out a little bit, where if it's like, okay, one person is looking very intently at my code, that's still, I mean, either one's nerve wracking. I was nervous before the competition too, not pretending otherwise. And
mhm.
it's a different kind of nerves, at least for me. So
How
yeah,
long was it like a one like 3 hour session or something, or were there multiple sessions? Oh man. Oh
multiple
boy.
sessions over months, kind of 2 hour,
Oh
2 to 3 hours at a shot. Like it was really fun. If you look up Sliced, there's a Notion site, and it's fun. Nick Wan and Meg Risdal hosted it, and they were fantastic. They honestly, I mean, I had a great time competing. I think all the other competitors were fantastic.
mhm.
We are bonded for life in a certain way, doing something kind of out there. And like I think Nick and Meg, like they really made it a fun experience for people to
Mhm.
watch, which
Yeah.
so all of that to say, I knew all these people in the data world all of a sudden. So I was able to reach out to people for referrals and reach out to people asking if they knew if there were open positions, things like that. So there were some things where like I didn't even technically apply because the person inside, and this is common, like this is not specific to me, like
Sure.
where basically like they make the internal referral and then they send you an application link. So you still technically apply, but it's like there's kind of a different path.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. This is
so
it's important to point that out, right? Like, and for a lot of folks, interviews are going to be easier to get if you have a referral within the company from a friend. You can
yep,
also try to like triangulate by like reaching out to someone on
yep,
LinkedIn who will just show mercy to you.
yep.
Um, a
That's a good way of
recruiter,
putting it.
yeah. And then recruiters as well are essentially people that you will convince to refer you to the company too. So
No,
these are all like valid mechanisms to get an interview. So, and I appreciate you clarifying that, like, that you had a network, right? So
yep,
you
I
had a
did.
network of support. And again, it's still super hard.
Oh, and this is something where like I have heard, and I believe this. I believe this to be true in general, and it did not generalize to me. Of like, I did not get. I had a better percentage outside of a few panic apply to way too many places at once, all at once kind of moments that
Yeah.
never worked, by the way, at least for me. But
I can
like
relate
when
to
I was when I was doing even slightly targeted applying, I actually had a better percentage interviews on cold applications that I did on referrals. And I don't know.
interesting.
I don't think that's another thing. I don't think anything about what I experienced is the rule. I think it's much closer to the exception. So I did have that network, and I will say having that network also really helped because it helped me feel like even when things were hard, like, okay, there are still people I can reach back out to. There are people who are in
Mhm.
my corner. It felt a little bit like a professional safety net, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. Even if it didn't
exactly.
actively we'll get to how I actually got the job I have, which is wild. But
That safety
so
net is
yeah,
really crucial.
yes.
Yeah, and so it's something that came up earlier today.
Hmm.
We need that, right? Because it's a wild
Yeah.
world out here. You don't have a lot of like safe harbors. Yeah, that was one
Yep.
term that has come to mind before. Yeah, and
Mm,
your friends, your colleagues, people that will go to bat for you. That is really our safety, right? Our social safety net. Yeah,
yep. For sure. And so yeah, so I had that, was also applying and doing my own kind of sets of interviews and did it pretty widely. It generally actually wanted out of mental health. I was pretty burned out.
yeah,
And I also was doing some consulting work and other work I was really excited about and didn't want a mental health place being like, well, you have to cite a non-compete and you can't do that anymore. So I had multiple reasons to kind of
okay.
um
Sorry. So yeah, so just to explain that a bit,
sure.
I think I have like a vague familiarity with it, but so you were doing contract work for mental health organizations, and therefore, like, if you took a more substantial, like a full-time contract, you wouldn't be able to do any of that other contract stuff because of the non-compete clause for companies in the same line of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. And I
That is
really
tricky. That,
yeah, I unfortunately can't get into the details, but it's a little more complicated than that. So I will say I wouldn't assume that if you're doing contract work, you can't keep doing it. Though I will say you have to check because there are places
mm,
that will do it just for that. For me, it's a little bit more complicated, and unfortunately, I can't go into the details. But just
sure,
know
yeah.
that, like, for me, bottom line was I for multiple intersecting reasons, did not want to work at a company as a data scientist that was focusing on mental health.
For
I
sure.
didn't want
And
that to be my 9 to 5 anymore, essentially.
that's very understandable. And then just for the audience, like, it's very common that we will have to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement with
Yep.
companies that we contract with. It's part of the industry.
Yep.
And in some ways, as we're seeing in our discussion, it can make it hard to offer complete, like, absolute transparency about what's
Yep.
happening, right? So it's really a trust-based system where like, I mean, I trust you. I know that we can trust you. And like we take your word about what your experience was. And I think it's very understandable.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that, a lot of people from like at least clinical psychology and sometimes even psychology more broadly, though, I know that there's more kind of jumping off points for them. The way they get into the data science field is jumping to a data scientist position, at if not a digital mental health company or something like that, like healthcare or in a
Mm,
hospital or like something that's like, okay, it's like people can see how you might have some domain expertise that might map on my
yeah,
current position. That was not the case at all. I am just a data scientist, and
just.
the well, yeah, I am. I will say, I think my clinical skills are something where people are like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like, how did you end up here?"
That's
As
funny.
opposed to, I do think it did help me in the interview process. Of people are like, "Oh, like this is someone who has literal training and background in talking to people, and so that is probably helpful when you're
Yeah,
talking when you're coordinating with stakeholders, like people who are interested in the analyses that you're doing or who you're delivering the analyses to. Knowing that I could translate the numbers into clear language is helpful for those folks. So
being able
um
to speak to business people essentially, right? Like people
yep,
that want to use your quantitative skills for actionable insights to make
yep.
decisions. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, so was doing that. Honestly, I think that um I had a pretty I don't know exactly how many jobs I applied to, but I think I had about like 15 to 20 that like went anywhere, realistically. And that's like got past the screening call and didn't then immediately have another screening call that that made one or the other of us. I will say, and that was something else that I did that I know that a lot of people maybe wouldn't feel as comfortable doing. And I think
Hmm.
there's good reason for that. I think my positionality really, unfortunately, affords me this more than other folks would have. Was I
Hmm.
said no a decent amount as well during the
To
process,
like
where
interview offers or
yeah, no, when I realized
like,
it wasn't really a good fit,
yeah.
there were some instances where I knew I wanted a full remote position that was really important to
Hmm.
me. And even though the position was advertised as full remote, there would then you would get into the process to be like, well, maybe it could be full remote, but realistically, we'd need you in the office in, insert random city, LA, 3 days a week. And I'm like, well, I live in New York and my wife is here and I'm
It's a
not,
non-starter,
yeah,
right?
like that's not
Yeah,
happening. So there
yeah.
were at least a couple of times things like that happened. Also, there were other times where they kind of describe what the role would be. And even though they wanted to move forward with me, I was like, that doesn't sound like a good, like I don't think I would be setting myself up to succeed. Like, could I survive in that job? Maybe.
Yeah.
But like, I'm not a
Well,
SQL maestro. And even if you think, oh, your dplyr syntax will translate really well to that, you'll be up and running in no time. I'm like, sure. And if I could find a job where I'm not having to completely swim against the current, that's probably what I would prefer. Again, like this was personal preferences. Maybe that job would have worked out great as an example. I don't know.
that makes
So
sense though. I mean, yeah, like you have a skill set, and if you can apply it directly, hit the ground running, I think it speaks a lot to how mindful you are about finding the best personal fit for you, and furthermore, finding a company that will trust you
yeah,
to use your vision, right? Do things the
yeah.
way that you want to. So I admire you for sticking to your guns, and I know that must have been tough, man. Like
It
going through
was.
that
It
for
was.
months and months. Like,
Yeah, it was. I will say the toughest one was when I actually went all the way to the end of an interview process and I realized I was like, I need to decline this offer.
hmm,
Like, I got the first offer I got, I declined, even though I will say I was ready to be done. I really wasn't feeling great about my chances.
hmm,
And ended up saying no to an offer for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
And, transparently, like one of them was compensation. They came in way lower than everywhere else that I had been interviewing and had even gotten to essentially final stage with previously. So that was a problem for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And another problem was, frankly, hopefully they don't hear this, but the last person who interviewed me seemed like they basically said, hey, you're going to be basically being asked to do like director level work for a very low salary. Like you're going to be
Okay.
asked to, like, I think like they were basically signaling to me like, you might want out, like you might not want this.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, there are things that they can say that are like permissible, but they're gonna do their best to like give you cues.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you. If by some chance you are listening to this, obviously I'm not going to name you, but thank you. I think both of us are in a better spot because of that.
The unsung hero of the interview
Yeah.
process. So good looking out. Good looking
Yeah.
out, folks.
So,
Yeah.
and if you weren't trying to do that, that's what you ended up doing anyway. So thanks. I think you
Might
were,
want to keep
but
that in mind.
um so yeah, so that was really tough. So I declined that offer, and then the kind of last stage of the process, you actually asked me originally, like working with recruiters. I actually didn't work with recruiters a lot, but I had kind of had some rough luck, or maybe not rough luck, rough performance. I don't know exactly what. um Again, I think that we should tell people 6 to 12 months. So I think I just basically had a time of applying.
Yeah.
But then I basically, like, I got referred to a recruiter by somebody else who had gotten a job through them. They worked with me, and like right off the bat, they were like, I'm not going to name this recruiter or the company, by the way. I want to be transparent, but like
That's
I'm
okay. Yeah.
still, yeah, like it's not, I will say it's also not a company that I think a bunch of people coming from academia are going to be going to, or I would say it, but they're a relatively niche startup, late stage, but relatively niche. So I feel more comfortable not naming them.
Yeah, you don't
And
have to
the
divulge anything. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So basically what happened is right off the bat, they were like, oh, the recruiter basically said you'd be a great fit here. And I would have been, actually. I think so. And so, went through the whole interview process there, did get tracked into a slightly different position that I agreed was a better fit. It seemed like things were going well. Did the final interview, didn't feel amazing about the final interview. I will say there were other final interviews that went better that I didn't end up getting the offer on. But essentially got a verbal offer through the recruiter from this company.
Interesting.
So,
Okay.
and that's like a key part of this is like, I would bet that if you sat this company down, they would say, oh, we didn't give him a verbal offer. Like the
Oh, that's so
recruiter.
weird. Right. And then, so just to clarify for our less
Yeah.
familiar audience members,
Yeah, please.
usually, so like you talk to a recruiter, like you'll apply to a job ad on LinkedIn. The
Yeah.
recruiter will hit you back. If they think you're a fit, you'll do a screening call.
Yeah.
They'll be like, hey, can you like clarify this part about your resume, these one or two
Yeah.
things? And then they're like, all right, now I'm going to send you an email. You email me back and say that I have the right to represent you. And then they refer you to the company. As far as I know, that's usually the end of like the recruiter involvement. It's very unusual that they would
Yeah.
then like intervene in the direct interaction with their client, with the company they're hiring for.
Like I said, not sure how generalizable any of my experience is, in the sense that I think the main thing here is just know that no matter what you experience, it's not you who is losing it. It's a wild experience.
I'm so
So
sorry.
yeah, so they gave me a verbal offer. It was on a Thursday. They were like, normally you'd get the official offer tomorrow, but this company is one of those cool companies where you get Friday off each of the summer months or whatever. So it'll come Monday. And Monday came and went, no offer. Tuesday came and went, no offer. Wednesday came and went, no offer. I am a wreck, I think is the best way to describe myself at this point. But I'm trying. I talked to other friends who worked for startups or who worked in this general field, and they were like, hey man, you're fine. like I think very well meaning. Hey man, you're fine. Like you can chill out. Like they probably just don't have their stuff together for the paperwork, and they need to like actually do the paperwork now. Like
Sometimes, yeah, like that could be
yeah,
a thing that could happen.
yep.
I could see that in
Yep.
a
And
reasonable
then
world.
yep, and then I got a phone call that they had frozen hiring between the verbal and official offer. Of course, they phrased it slightly differently, but like that's, I mean, like they did say freezing hiring.
Yeah.
And so it could be that it could be a million things, right? I'm never gonna know. Like it could be they
Yeah.
decided that they didn't want to give me the offer. It could be that they really did freeze. I mean, there was some weird kind of shady stuff that's not really worth going into. But like maybe they just didn't want to give me the offer anymore. I
But
do think it really that the company was kind of pivoting, and this was right after Meta slowed down hiring or was
mhm,
rumored to be freezing hiring one of the times earlier in this
mhm.
year. So I think there are a lot of times where people will take those kind of things and run with them, especially if they don't have a lot of their own strategy together.
Right. Like they'll take their
Um,
cues from the companies that are seen as leaders in the tech
exactly.
environment. Yeah.
So so yeah, so I was upset. I felt really down at that point. I will say I think that that was something where I still had one other thing that was kind of in the pipeline, but I wasn't really sure about it. They were great, by the way. These those folks, the folks who I still have in the pipeline, they though I will say I enjoyed talking with them. They ended up freezing hiring as well,
Mhm.
um, which also was less devastating because of how things ended up turning out, but could have been super devastating.
Yeah.
So I was the way I got my job transparently in the end after all these things. I built out this network that didn't directly get me the job. Still important, didn't directly get me the job.
Mhm.
I had a pretty good success cold applying to things in a way that kind of got me the job, but like not it wasn't like I optimized my LinkedIn profile. I worked through a recruiter, which a lot of people recommend doing first. That went terribly for me. It's gonna be real hard for I will say, like, I'll work with a recruiter again. I'm not ruling it out. I just like, whew, if I cannot, then I will.
It
uh,
was a miscommunication, bottom line, miscommunication.
Yeah,
At
no. And
least, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I'm
and an
sorry.
external recruiter too. I will say, like, I appreciate you've done this several times, and I should, you know, I should do a better job of clarifying. I mean, also external recruiters, so recruiters that are outside the company
That
that
work
kind of
right.
match you up. There are lots of companies that have, internal recruiters who, like, for what it's worth, like, I've had nothing but really positive experiences talking with those people, even when
Mhm.
they've like sent me really bad news. There was one interview that I frankly, like, I choked. Like
Oh,
it's the only live coding exercise where I really felt like I was like, man, I just had a bottom 10% day. And like
oh
the
no.
recruiter like got back in touch with me, and they were like, hey, I'm really sorry that this happened. Like I really like we were like definitely rooting for you. Like, please, can we like connect on LinkedIn and keep in touch for like
Yeah.
next time? Like, there was like it was very, especially like in that was earlier than all these
Yeah.
things,
Yeah. Yeah.
luckily.
Yeah.
But like I had great experiences with recruiters internal to companies, so I
It's
want to make
very,
sure I make the distinction.
I
So
do appreciate that. Yeah. So, and there are external recruiters which like they advertise jobs through their company, which is a company of all recruiters, which are then hired by their clients, which are like, biotech tech companies that are
yep,
looking for data
yep,
scientists. And yeah, the interactions are different. I've had lovely experience with internal recruiters that are like
yep,
attached to the actual company they're working with. That I don't know, I feel like it's more chill in some
yep.
ways.
No,
And
it really
yeah.
is. Well, because it's also one of the reasons why companies have internal recruiters. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this industry. It's just literally what people have said to me who are internal recruiters. Is like, well, yeah, like I get paid, like I get paid reliably. Like I have goals of how many people I have to put in the pipeline and everything. Like it's not like those pressures go away completely, but a lot of external recruiters, I'm not saying this is the only way it works, they really only get paid if they get people placed. And like that
Right.
can be a very it sounds incredibly stressful.
Oh yeah, I totally
So
identify with how that would make them feel a lot of pressure, and the incentive for them very, very obviously, very understandably is to maximize volume and turnover rate, right?
yep,
And yeah, like
yep,
that's why they're so fast. Like it's crazy sometimes, like you'll send your resume to a LinkedIn ad, they'll be like, "Hey, can you call?" And you're like, yeah, half an hour later they're calling you. They're like, "Okay, like let's do the thing with the resume. I'm about to send you the email. Make sure you respond. I'm gonna get this out,"
yep,
right? Very,
yep.
very
No,
fast.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, they're under an intense amount of pressure.
Yeah.
So whenever I have particularly uncharitable thoughts about the external recruiter I work with, I try to remember that.
Of course. Yeah.
I try. I don't really succeed, if I'm being
You
honest, but
are
I try.
entitled to your emotional experience too, because yeah,
Thank
like
you.
if they're, of course, yeah, it's
Yeah,
very, it's very understandable to feel every type of
yeah,
way about that.
yeah. So in the end, what happened was I was sitting on the patio of a bar, scrolling Twitter. And it wasn't even someone who I followed. It was something where it was like, based on your likes, I saw a tweet of like, hey, we're looking for an R analytics developer data scientist. And transparently, one of the things that you'll see in a lot of data science ads is like, they really want Python. Like, I like, and by the way, like, I think Python is a really cool language. I think it can do a lot. And like, my primary experience was in R. I can do
Yeah.
stuff in Python, but something that if I could do this again, that I would have done differently is instead of starting to apply for jobs right off the bat in, middle of January, even though I was getting bites, was I would have spent a little more time amping up my SQL and a little more time amping up my Python. Because even though I didn't get booted at the initial technical screens, I think not being as strong in those relative to my R did bite me in some final interviews. I
That's
think
really
that
helpful to know. Yeah.
um,
And very understandable, like from all the job ads that I've looked at, because like I had a fair to
mhm.
passing interest in data science, and I've seen
Yeah.
that. I'm also like coming from a self-taught art background, like that's
Hmm.
really my strength. And it's funny like how much you can just get by in the academic sphere with a lot of projects, like just being
Hmm.
strong in that like one language. And frankly, that sets you like so far apart that you're like, well, this is
Hmm.
just aces, I'm
Yep. Oh,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. So
Yeah.
okay, so bone up on SQL and Python, even if you're an R
Yep.
fanatic, like
Yep.
like
Yep.
you and I would identify. Yeah,
Yeah, no, for sure. And I
yeah.
think like that's something that, I'm very happy where I am now. And like whenever the next time I change jobs is like, I'm gonna follow my own advice. Like that's what I'll put
Mhm.
it that way. Like I will spend more time. I also am getting to write more of mostly SQL. I will say I still write mostly R in my current job
Mhm.
because the posting was for an R analytics developer,
I can
data
see you're
scientist.
just beaming happiness and
Yeah,
radiant positivity.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a great time. So yeah, on the
the
porch of
dream.
this on the porch of this bar, scrolling Twitter, my friend who I was hanging out with had just gone to the restroom. Based on my likes, this tweet comes in. I click on it. It's a pretty straightforward application, and I mostly just need my resume, which I have my resume on my website, so I just downloaded my resume off my
Mhm.
website onto my phone, put the application in, and then it was just a really great fit. Like off to the races. Like it was really great fit of like not just, oh, they want somebody who was really good in R, but they also, it was a great fit that it was full remote. It was a great fit that I really, really liked my current boss a lot. The person who
Mhm.
was running the interview process, like we clicked really well. The particular kinds of R skills that they were looking for were R skills that I was really good at, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
they were a very small startup, so it was more likely that somebody was going to actually like read my whole resume, which, and again, another good fit was they looked at my kind of like interesting mishmash of experiences and saw like, oh, this is really cool, versus looking at my interesting mishmash of experiences and being like, huh, no
This is a
thanks.
distraction, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So, and for what it's worth, I mean, like, in the end, it took me about 5 months to go from really actively applying to, getting the offer, getting an offer that I accepted.
Yeah.
It was, I guess it
Something that
was
was a good
closer.
fit, right? Like,
Yeah, it was closer to like 3.5, I guess, to the first offer. I might be
yeah.
slightly misremembering that. Because maybe I'm blocking it out, honestly. But so yeah, but I went from the very beginning of that process, because again, this is a small startup. They were really trying to hire, they really wanted to bring someone in, to
Mhm.
getting the offer, I think in like a week and a half. Like it
That's
was,
awesome. Wow, that's a good
yeah.
turnaround.
Whereas in a lot of cases, I mean, like if you're interviewing at big tech companies, like that can take months.
Yeah.
And even some non-big tech companies, like actually the first place I got the offer, like, whatever it was, 4.5 months in, like that interview process took almost 3 months. It was a bear.
That's super hard. Yeah.
So, I mean, some of that was like delays, and like also like people are humans, right? Like one of the things I
Mhm.
know that happened in that process was like something happened with like somebody's kid and they had to cancel the meeting. And like, of course, like I'm
Yeah.
not like, but and like that impacts you, right?
Yeah, right.
Like if, and one of the things that was a flag that was raised for me was not that if anything, it was a green flag, but like, okay, yeah, something happened with their kid and they were able to leave. The yellow to red flag was that when that one meeting time didn't work, it took them a week and a half to figure out a time that all three of the people in the meeting were going to have a 15 minutes that they shared, where it was all available. So, that's an
Right.
aside. Anyway,
I
so
understand. Right. Yeah.
really, really, really happy where I'm at now. I've been there, oh man, like almost 4 months now. So like
That's
that's the thing.
awesome.
Also, like I'm still relatively early in this, and I can
Yeah.
understand folks listening to this and being like, well, you've described like you're talking all this stuff and you've only been in your new job 4 months, to which I say, fair.
Yeah.
And I also still remember what it was like to do this interview process for the first time. It's still at least somewhat fresh in my brain. So honestly, it's one of the reasons why I agreed to do this and brought it up, was because I was like, I know this is going to fade into something else at some point, and it already has, I'm sure, because I was able to get a job before there were even more hiring slowdowns and freezes after I got this job. Like I don't know exactly what it would have looked like.
Yeah.
So I can say all I want. Oh, maybe I should have spent more time at the beginning doing SQL and Python, and like maybe if I had spent 2 months doing that, maybe it would have gone better in some of the interviews, but maybe I would
Yeah.
have run into more hiring freezes. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of luck going here. Like, it's I've pretty fastidiously actually tried to avoid making comparisons to academia in this section, because I made a lot in the meta conversation at the beginning. But like
Mhm.
I think there are huge advantages of this kind of job market as compared to the academic job market, in that there are new jobs every day. That yes,
Mhm.
there might be many applications for a position just like in academia, but there's still recognition that those jobs are very valuable in terms of
Mhm.
dollars
Mhm.
and things like that. And that at the same time, there's still a lot of things that are very true about the academic job market that generalize super well to industry. There's a lot of bias and unreliability and prejudice and frankly discrimination. I
Mhm.
don't think I experienced those, to be clear. I think that I probably unfortunately benefited from that.
Yes. Yeah.
And so like there's a lot of that. There's also like there's a lot of luck. There's a lot of luck
Mhm.
of like timing of like I sent in that application on from the like porch of that bar. Like if like the speed at which that company was moving, if I had just like put that in my bookmarks, like I really like where I work now and I probably wouldn't be working there.
Dude,
Like it,
I wanted to highlight that timing, right? And the overall patterns I'm noticing here are the persistence of your search, the emotional commitment it takes, and the timing with the organization that you happen to
yep.
connect with. Like it catches fire at the right time.
No, yeah. And I think that is something that happened more. I'm honestly not sure. I think at least some of these were maybe like nice letdowns of like, we don't actually think you're a fit, but we're just going to tell you that, oh, somebody else is accepted.
Mhm.
But a decent number of the searches that I was a part of that went a little bit further, it wasn't even like I literally had an interview scheduled, and then they were like, hey, we're really sorry, like this has nothing to do with you, and like somebody further along in the pipeline accepted the
Yeah,
position.
yeah,
So like that does and that was like, that was not something that I was like as ready for. So you're totally right, like the timing that, and that's where like I feel like a lot of luck comes in. Like sure, you can maybe strategize, it's like, okay, filter your LinkedIn to like only the jobs that were posted in the past 7 days or whatever, but like even that, it's like probably more illusion of control than actual control.
yeah. Some jobs
So
they get like reposted. So
yep,
that's not even like
yep.
a surefire way to do it. Dude,
Yeah.
I totally agree. There's so much luck and chance. So something that academics have brought up at least a couple of times with me is they want to know,
Mhm.
is there a seasonality to the job market?
Mm.
And I think like to some degree there may be, but like
Mhm.
honestly, my understanding is exactly what you said. There will always be new opportunities. And whenever you can start the process, then you're giving yourself a chance to catch one of those rising opportunities.
Yeah. No, I mean the thing about like I am very hesitant to say it's just a numbers game, right? Because people say that about academic jobs, and like that's not true. I mean,
Mhm.
like like and like I do hesitate to say like, oh, actually, this is just a numbers game too. And I like I do agree with part of with what you're saying, not just part of. I agree with what you're saying
Mhm.
that like the way that you can get a job in data science is by actually trying to apply and seeing what happens, right? Because you
Yeah.
get essentially like behavioral feedback on what you need to work on to get the job, and or if you just need to keep going until you get lucky enough to get the job, probably more the second than the first. But like, okay, if you're applying and you're not getting bites back from recruiters or from people at the organizations, then okay, like let's look at your resume, let's see how we can make some shifts so that you get the reach outs. Okay, if you're getting to the initial screens and then people are saying, this isn't a good fit consistently, like, okay, let's figure out how to maybe translate a little bit better from your academic discipline, how to talk about your value as a data scientist,
Mhm.
instead of maybe in terms that are more familiar to you.
Yeah.
If you're getting to the tech screens and then going out on those, like, okay, do I need to regroup for a couple of weeks and take take some time if I have it, by the way, like all these are privileged things to do, like
Hmm.
um of okay, am I going to brush up a little bit more on SQL, or am I going to dive a little bit more into Python before I kind of renew some of this? And then if you're getting to the final interviews and you're having to live code maybe a little bit more and makes you nervous, like, hey, do I need to like practice, like even like having it doesn't have to be a technical expert or anything, like even just having a friend like essentially do something like that with you and like act like how someone interviewing you would act, like you can even give them the questions to ask you. None of these are like silver bullet things, right? And none of
Hmm.
them are stronger, I think, than the luck elements, and also frankly like the privilege element. Like people are going to look at me and they're going to be like, he just looks like a data
He
scientist.
looks right, dude. I've
Like,
wondered about
yeah.
this so many times.
Oh, like I can't explain why. I'm like, I can. I'm a
Yeah,
white dude who presents in a masculine way, on top of a lot of other things. Like I
yeah.
think that that is something that like I do not want to. I think sometimes when people talk about luck, it can be a way of dodging talking about privilege, and I
Hmm.
want to talk about both.
Thank you for
um,
being so clear about that. And like I've thought about it a lot lately because like almost every person who has ever given me a job has, I think, looked very much like me, right?
mhm,
Like on the academic
yeah.
side and now on the industry side as well. So this
Yep.
privilege, it extends like beyond
Oh
just the
yeah.
academic discussion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
For
and it's,
sure. And
yeah.
yeah, like that's something where um I think in some ways, like I've talked about lots of ways in which I felt like, oh, my path wasn't super generalizable. Like that's the least generalizable part, and like that's a
Mhm.
problem, right? Like it's
Yeah,
not like I really like being part of the data science community. I think there are lots of positive things there, and like yeah, like the if this was actually about like who could bring the most like powerful, interesting, and impactful set of skills and experiences, like the field would not be as full of white dudes as it is now. Like
right.
it just wouldn't. And so like I think that the important thing for me is like, okay, we reckon with that, and like it's less about saying, oh well, okay, well then data science is inherently not a place you can be. Um and as a person with privilege, to be clear, like people who are being minoritized can and should do whatever they want and shouldn't have to listen to anything I say.
Yeah, no, we
um
understand this is your personal
yeah,
opinion and your perspective.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like for those of us with privilege, it's about, okay, how do we leverage that privilege to make our space more just, right?
yes.
Like how do we become an active part of the solution? I'll admit, like I am still trying to figure out what that looks like for
Hmm.
me. And I've made some attempts, but I think so, like that's something that is important to, as I like talk about my path, right? Like my
Yeah,
positionality is tied up in every single step of that. And I
yeah.
think to, I'm not saying like I am unskilled or that I can't do things. And to, I do not want the takeaway from this podcast to be, well, just work hard enough and it'll work. Like
Of course.
that's like, I don't think that's what you intend at all either. I just realized that like I'm telling this kind of narrative of like I had my trials and tribulations, but I
Hmm.
ultimately got what I wanted and it went well. And it's like,
People want to extract that moral at the end, but
yeah,
we never know all the elements in the system. And I think
yep,
what we can be explicit and define that we do know is that our identity is an inextricable part of the process, right? It can't be
yep,
separated from what we went through. And
no,
I think everyone that is able to hear you and everyone that knows you and that has like seen you demonstrate behaviors like that establish your qualifications, I can't see anyone doubting you for very good reasons. And yet there is still this element here which we can't take
mm-hmm.
away, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And like, you know, if people are still listening at this point, I'm gonna assume generally good faith. And like
Oh yeah, yeah.
it is something where I am not going to pretend to have like the exact answers or the exact takeaways. I think like when I try to give advice around these things, I try to be as transparent as I can, like you discussed, and
Mhm.
also like trying to thread the needle between like, okay, like my best guesses at like which parts of this might be generalizable and like might be general enough advice that to actually be useful, right? While
Mhm.
knowing that inherently, if you're trying to give somewhat general advice, they're going to be very legitimate critiques of like, well, like that doesn't really apply here, or like that isn't really like what I needed to hear. And I think like a lot of critiques can come down to like, hey, this wasn't what I needed to hear, and like
Yeah,
that's true, like
yeah.
I believe that person.
Mhm.
And also like a lot of critiques are just like, yeah, like I'll go back and be like, yeah, no, I don't agree with that actually, like you made a really good point, like I've changed my mind. I might not be happy about it, I might need a minute to process, but
I
so yeah,
think
I mean,
you did a very nice job of honoring all of the elements involved with the journey and acknowledging where they may or may not extend to others. Um, to kind of like tie it together here, should we like make an attempt at doing kind of like a summary, you know,
sure.
because yeah, it's just funny. I'm thinking about like the viral like content, like, you know, these Twitter threads, like these are the 5 things you need to be a data scientist, and it's like SQL, Python. I mean, I don't even know the other ones, but
Yeah,
yeah, what they haven't hit on, and I love that you brought this up, is that you have to start early. start sooner than later. You have to be persistent. You have to get lucky to find these rising opportunities as they come up. And you have to be lucky to find a really good personal fit with the people on the other side and what they're looking for. You do also have to have like, you know, enough skills, I think, to convince them that you will grow to inhabit the role. But like you explained that you didn't even ideally position yourself with skills because like you said like, you know, SQL, Python, like those aren't your strong suits and a lot of people want them. Whether or not it's reasonable to like filter people that way, or whether that's a kind of gatekeeping, I think that's also another discussion. But regardless, like basic fact is that a lot of companies operate that way. Are there other pieces that you want to highlight from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are pretty good summary points. I think that one thing I will say on the technical side, and I think this is something where it's a bit tricky, is like I think there is a strong temptation for people with PhDs to tell people in data science that you already have the skills. And on some level, that's true. Like you do have a lot of skills. Like this is not to downgrade any individual person who is looking to pursue data science. And PhD training by and large does not actually equip you with all the skills you need to have a successful data science application. I actually think it does equip you decently well to do data science. But like you said, with the emphasis on being able to be good at SQL, especially actually in my living experience, I know that and I've heard that from others as well. I know there are people who got data science jobs without having to write a line of SQL. I'm not saying it's universal. And it's pretty common to have that be kind of like, because so much data in industry is in databases, you need SQL to get at it in one way or another. Whereas in a lot of academic contexts, not all, but a lot, there's not enough data to necessitate a database.
Right, like we don't have the infrastructure that exists on the business scale. So
exactly. So like I think that by and large, unfortunately, like a lot of people just from their PhD training will not have the specific specialized skills that people are hiring on. So like, and that is not your fault. You are not bad at data science because you do not have those skills yet. And like realistically, like, and I think this is going to be more and more true going forward. You know, if you're an R person, like cool, I am too, and we all are probably gonna have to learn some more Python, and definitely some SQL. And I guess the last summary point is just like, yeah, like I mean, my positionality is tied up in all of these summary points in ways that like I know which direction they point, right? They all point in the direction of making this easier for me. And like I don't know which exact steps and which exact moments, maybe all of them, I don't know, where that push was. So that will make my experience a less reliable narrator for other people's experiences in ways that frankly I will probably underestimate. So like I think it's just important to have that be part of the summary.
And I really want to give you credit for acknowledging that so clearly. And I think you've done the essential work here, which is to say that it's a known unknown in the equation for you. And everyone should approach their personal experience with their eyes up and be mindful of the fact where their experience is going to differ.
No.
Because
No, and I think, you know, this is something where being kind to ourselves is easier when we are used to the rest of the world being kind to us too. So I don't want to just be like, oh, like just be kinder to yourself. It's hard for everyone. It's like, no, it is much harder for you if you identify in specific minoritized ways. Like it's not So, and I
Right,
don't
like,
want to take away anybody's power or anybody's like vitality or anyone's, abilities either. I don't want to, tokenize or commodify either. So I'm just doing my best. And
you're
I know I'm gonna fall short in ways that matter. And I hope that people will call me out or call me in with some grace, and we'll all just try to keep doing better. So
I think that we are all very grateful for what you shared with us from your personal perspective. So I just want to thank you. Um, you've just done an exemplary job here, and this has been more rich and rewarding than, yeah, I could have imagined, honestly. And that's, again, super privileged as a perspective, but it's something that I want to pass on to the community
yeah.
out of thanks for
Thanks.
what we've benefited from.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for having me. I mean, some of this is like me trying to work through this experience and what it means. And I think, pretending otherwise would be kind of silly. It's not like I had all of this planned ahead of time. So
Let's be clear, I deliberately did not make this scripted, so everything has been extemporaneous.
yeah, yeah,
We've
it's
been,
true.
yeah. It's true, believe it or not, folks. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. And I look forward to hearing from other folks on this as well, and both on the podcast and in other places. So just very, very, very excited to be here, excited to have a chance to talk. And thanks so much for the chance to start trying to work through some of this stuff in a way that I hope could be helpful to someone.
Yes, people definitely want to understand the personal experience of what it's like to go through this. And thank you. It's been my pleasure and my honor to host you.
Thanks so much for
So,
having me.
all right, so